Good morning, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you all to the coaching conference here of 2019. I suppose when we look back on the year that has gone past in the context of coaching and games development, I suppose our coaching and games development undertook 4 major initiatives in the year, and the first of those was the recognition of hurling as an intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. And in that context, we had to go to Paris and present hurling and the history of hurling and the impact of hurling in Irish society to international delegations to convince them of the value of hurling to Ireland and to Irish society. And I suppose what a year to actually do it when you look back on the championship that we had this year. And I suppose if one memory hits me was arriving in Croke Park for the day of the second hurl All-Ireland semi-final and feeling this is going to be a damp squib after yesterday's performances, and it turned out to be even better. But in a year in which Limerick probably brought joy to everybody's heart by bridging that 45-year gap, we actually did succeed in getting it over the line with UNESCO, that hurling now has this intangible heritage status recognised throughout. We had great support from the Department of Heritage, Culture and the Gaeltacht, and in particular the Minister Joseph Madigan. And I'm just going to run a little clip that we used when we were in Paris in the context of what hurling is, that you may see what hurling really is and how we actually sold it to those international delegates.
Hurling is a uniquely Irish field sport for teams, played with a hurley stick made of ash and a ball known as a schlitter. It is played on a pitch that is larger than in soccer, with the objective being to score as many goals and points as possible. A goal is scored by playing the ball under the crossbar between your opponent's goalposts, while a point is scored by playing the ball over the crossbar between these goalposts. A goal is worth the equivalent of 3 points. The ball, or schlitter, can be tossed from the hand and struck with a hurley, struck on the ground or in the air, and it can also be kicked or hand-passed. It may be caught in flight, but it cannot be thrown or lifted directly from the ground with the player's hand. The game is played by male and female players at child, youth and adult level. The female version is referred to as camogie. Small teams are the norm at child level, while thereafter youth and adult players progress to the full 15-a-side game, with each team made up of a goalkeeper, 6 backs, 2 midfielders and 6 forwards. The playing rules are implemented by a referee, who is assisted by 4 goal umpires and 2 sideline officials. And these rules have undergone significant change since the establishment of the GAA in 1884. Games usually consist of 2 halves of 30 to 35 minutes, and with ball speeds reaching 120 kilometers per hour, hurling is considered by many people to be the fastest and most skilled field sport in the world. And it's Irish to the core.
It is our hope that our children here in Ireland will be exposed to hurling through many of the initiatives we organise from within this organisation, such as Go Games, Kellogg's Cool Camps and 5-star centres. The second initiative that we engaged with this year was we linked up with the Office of the Children's Ombudsman, and from that we produced a resource of the rights awareness of children in the context of playing games. And that, I feel, is something that should always be in the background when any of us are actually working in a coaching environment or working with children, that children actually have rights. Whilst we're the individual in charge and organising, but the people we're actually dealing with have rights. And I'm going to digress from the 4 points that I'm going to discuss, just to reflect somewhat on my own experiences as a coach throughout the time that I was involved in it. And one thing that shocked me recently from a mini congress that we had at our youth forum was that 65% of those partaking in that mini congress actually said they had a negative experience with a coach. I was surprised that it was so high. But then I reflected on my own performance as a coach, and one clip appeared in the media this week that actually brought it back to me, where, and I don't know if any of you have seen it, but when Pádraig Harrington was announced as captain of the Ryder Cup team, Independent.ie showed a clip of a schools match here out in Croke Park, where Pádraig Harrington kicked the ball over the bar from about 45 metres out, and the crossbar came down. But there was a skinny little coach ran in from the sideline managing one of the teams, happened to be me, and I ran up the pitch to the goalkeeper on my own team. And rather than express concern about how was he because he brought the crossbar down, I actually had to head off him because we were winning the match. It was a final in Croke Park, and I didn't want the match abandoned because we were going to give up on it. So I certainly have been haunted by that video. It's appeared twice this year. But one other issue that actually came out of that game that we can all reflect on is we actually changed the timing of that match to allow Coláiste have Pádraig Harrington play for them. He was their best player. We brought the match forward by an hour. The reason being is Pádraig was going off to play an interprovincial golf game for Leinster up in the north, and he needed to get away that bit early. But in the game, Pádraig actually fell, marking Desi Farrell, and sprained his wrist. He went on, played the interprovincial golf, told absolutely nobody about the fact that he had a sprained wrist because he didn't want to let on to the golfing people that he had actually been playing a Gaelic football match that morning. Played with it, but that injury has lasted with him for life and even flared up when he won his first British Open. So if any lessons are to be gained out of that, we all need to reflect on how we deal with youngsters, but when a youngster gets injured, we need to be careful about it. I'm quite sure it was a simple sprained wrist, and if it had been treated properly, it wouldn't be a lifelong injury that Pádraig Harrington actually has. I suppose when you talk about being a coach, there's two things, and they tie in very much with the Ombudsman. One is values, and the second is well-being. And when you go into coaching, you should go in with a certain set of values. And ultimately, you should be looking out for the well-being of the youngsters or the players that you're actually dealing with, be it physical, mental, or in the skills area. Anyone you work with in a coaching context should always finish in a better place for the experience of you being their coach. As a coach, you're a leader. Everybody reflects on Jim Gavin being a good leader. The one thing Jim Gavin does, he constantly reads leadership books as to how to do it better and how to deal with people. You should separate the wood from the trees and step back and reflect on the job that you're actually doing. Think about it. You get a squad of 20 players. They're put in your care, and you should give them the care that you'd give one of your own. I'll give you an analogy. If you had 20 horses in the field and you brought Willie Mullins or Aidan O'Brien up and asked them to look into the field at the 20 horses, how would they see the 20 horses? They would see them as 20 individuals, all fit for different purposes. Whether it's a 5 furlong race, a 1 mile 4 furlong, whether it's to go over hurdles, to go over fences, or not fit for any of them and go off and do a bit of equestrian work. And that's the way we should look on all of our players. They're all individuals. They all come with a certain set, and we should leave them the better for our experience and working with us. We should deal with them as individuals. We should look at our training sessions and say, is it about everybody doing the same thing just because that's convenient in training? Or should we slow it down a little bit and actually reflect, those 4 lads are weak at kicking, those 4 lads are weak at catching, and actually give them some individual training rather than do complete group work. I took over a development squad in Dublin at 16 years of age, and these are young lads that were being trained from 8 years of age, and I was shocked at the poor standard of actually kicking the ball. And I think it reflects that sometimes when we put a training session together, we're inclined to go for the easy option, the successful one, the hand passing and a lot of those easy drills, rather than actually work at what's something that wasn't working, the poor kicking of the young lads involved. I'd often believe that intensity rather than longevity is a far better way of training young lads. Dragging a session out for an hour and a half, 2 hours is not necessarily the way to get it to them. They're far better off doing it in short bursts of intensity. Young players need time to develop. I was fortunate in my time to come across many good players, but when Philly McMahon was a minor on the Dublin squad in 2005, Philly was scrawny, was a good footballer, he could play in the backs of the forwards, but he just didn't have the physical strength to actually make it onto the team. When you look at Philly McMahon now on the pitch, you would kind of say physical strength, a lack of physical strength on the part of Philly McMahon. He took time to develop, he took time to come through. Brian Fenton similarly never made a Dublin minor team, and now you look at his record in championship terms. So players need time to develop. It's not all about short-term goals. And that's probably one of the great reasons why I'm so against outside managers coming into clubs and getting paid. It's not just as much of them taking money out of the club, but they don't have the long-term interest of development of players within the club. They've short-term goals of success, and that's what they want to deliver on. And sometimes some of your younger, brightest stars will get left behind. I went down one day to watch Kilkenny training. My young lad was with me. He was into athletics. I said nothing to him other than ask him, watch the training session. And going back in the car, we talked about it. He said, what did you notice? And I said, there wasn't one cone on the pitch. And I asked him, what did he notice? And he said the intensity of the tackling and the drive that was going into the actual training session. Success at a young age doesn't mean it's going to be long-term, that you're going to get retention and that you're going to keep these players. Numerous Féile All-Ireland winning teams have never lasted to provide success within their club at minor level. I took another 16 development squad in Dublin, and there was an All-Ireland winning Féile club, provided 9 players. They didn't win a minor championship, and they had only 1 player on the final minor squad, because success at that young age didn't encourage them. It probably knocked them off their game. I'm just going to finish up on my reflections by going back to what I said at the very beginning. If you go into coaching, go into it bringing values with you, and make sure that when you're finished, you've looked after the well-being of all those players that have been in your care. The third area this year in coaching and games that we had a great success was in terms of the PE curriculum. I suppose as a school principal, I never enjoyed filling in or taking a PE class because I always felt it lacked a bit of respect within the education system. There was no exam outcome and everybody just wasn't buying into it. But now that it's getting the proper recognition as a proper subject within the system, I think that's one thing that's going to be very positive. But we as an organisation have driven on, created a resource package so that we as an organisation will have an impact in second level schools. I think we have to get into the real world. Education in Ireland is changing, and school teams are not going to be in the future what they were in the past. The demands within the system are becoming greater and the volunteers within the system are diminishing. So this is possibly one great way of us as an organisation, along with our Future Leaders programmes, to continue to create an impact for ourselves within the second level sector. And the last area that the Coaching and Games Department engaged in this year was in introducing experimental rules. It was an area that a lot of people have talked about. Some people say it's pundit driven, but any of the work done by the committee in this area of the experimental rules was very clearly based on fact and was an attempt to improve the actual spectacle of the game. We are getting an outcry from players and managers, and they can look at it from one angle. Their object is to win. Our responsibility is to entertain. That's why the rules were brought in. There will be different views. They will be reviewed. It's for everyone to engage and get involved in the debate that's going on about them. But they're based on fact, and they were brought together for the purposes of improving football, because unfortunately it is a bit like comparing apples with oranges. It is somewhat in the shadow of hurling at the moment. I'd just like to thank Pat Daly and his team for organising today's conference. I think it's a sellout every year, long before Christmas. That's a reflection on the quality of the product. So Pat and his team, well done, and hopefully each and every one of you down there today gained something from your experience here today. Gora maith agaibh.